The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Big news to start off today's show. Evander Kane traded from the Edmonton Oilers to the Vancouver Canucks in exchange for a fourth-round pick. The first person to break that news, Evander Kane himself, going on social media with a long post thanking the Edmonton Oilers before acknowledging his new team, his hometown team, the Vancouver Canucks. How did we get here, CJ? How did this trade come to be?
This is a salary cap trade, I would say. I mean, in a world without a cap, I don't think we're talking about Edmonton moving on from Evander Kane because, for all the discussion we might have about him, he's a pretty darn effective player for them when he was healthy enough to be in their lineup. And, the reason we're here is he was owed $5.125 million in terms of a cap hit on the final year of his contract next season. Edmonton has already committed some of their future cap space to the Leon Draisaitl extension. They have Evan Bouchard still to get signed to what will be a big jump in his deal. And in that environment, they've got to cut some money, and I don't think they're going to stop here with Evander Kane. But, Kane was the odd man out, and, they're able to trade the entirety of his contract and get back a fourth-round pick. Which is, pretty immaterial really to this deal. This trade was all about, getting some more roster and cap flexibility for the Oilers and for the Canucks. They just got a free player, essentially. I mean, a fourth round pick that was, as I mentioned, going out the door. But for all intents and purposes, you're looking at a guy with over an 82 game pace in the last 10 years, is a 25 goal scorer in the league and does a lot of other things too in terms of physicality, winning battles, intimidation. All those things that go into winning hockey. So that's really how we got here. And I got to say, I was a little surprised by how many people were panning this move because, well, I think there's lots of room for different opinions. I feel like everybody was against it. And I think it's actually a pretty tidy piece of business.
So you were surprised at the reaction with it? I'm very curious about that because I was on the side, I think a lot of people were responding that way. And I think it came from a particular market where they have heard enough stories. They've seen enough about the personality that is Evander Kane, and maybe they're apprehensive about that. Also, Vancouver is just getting out of a situation where they had personalities clash between JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, and that gets resolved the way that it gets resolved. And then they add in the personality that is Evander Kane. That's where I think a lot of that is coming from.
Right, but I don't recall one story at Edmonton with Evander Kane clashing with a teammate. I mean, there might be something I'm not aware of, but anyway, look, it's fine to I'm not saying it's a home run, but it could be a home run. I mean, there's a couple ways this goes. Obviously, Vancouver wants to be in the playoffs next year. He could be part of the success of this team. I think that is a path that's easy to imagine. Really, the question mark is health. But he was healthy in the playoffs, and he's got a full offseason now to get ready for the year. You're going to have a motivated player playing at the final year of his deal. He's in his hometown. So that's one box here. And if the season for the Canucks doesn't go well, I just don't see a world that you're not getting more than the fourth round pick you just used to acquire Evander Kane back for him at the trade deadline. I mean, I know that's not the intent here, and I'd say it's more likely he has a pretty good year. The Canucks have a good year. We're probably talking about him re-signing next year before July 1st. Anyway, I feel like I don't even know where it all came from. Like, I don't think it's a lot of stuff got thrown out there, but I get that Evander Kane certainly has a history that I'm not trying to gloss over, but I'm also just looking at the last four seasons where he put the puck a ton in the net for the Oilers. I talked to a few scouts today, still rave about his game. Like, think that this guy could be a difference maker. And yes, the $5 million in cap space is something. The Canucks, that's opportunity cost. That's $5 million you can't, spend elsewhere. But beyond that, they added him for free. And I look at my free agent board, and as much as time as I put into that, we got 80 names on it right now. Yeah. Evander Kane is better than 60 players at least probably on that board. And so I'm just arguing that there's not a lot of clear upgrades out there to be found. And I think the Canucks probably found one in this trade.
Okay. Well, time will tell about how that deal will work out for the Vancouver Canucks. They seem to be all for it. They took on the salary. You did make some good points about his capabilities on the ice. I just think with what Vancouver has going on right now, the last thing they need is any bit of controversy. And if Evander can stay out of that,
but it's Vancouver. There's always going to be controversy. Like even stuff that isn't controversial causes controversy in Vancouver.
I mean, yeah, which is why some fans, I think, were very like, "Oh, are you sure you want to do this?" I think they have right to question about that move going. That's all I'm saying.
Like they won a Calder Cup and the owner tweets about it and then a hashtag says like not for sale. Like they can't even just celebrate a championship like normally. You know what I mean? There's not to like take this in a weird direction, but I'm just saying that this is what the DNA of that organization is. There's always some degree of controversy and chaos going on. So, I mean, the idea that wouldn't be present to me is impossible.
That's fair. Okay, what else is next for the Vancouver Canucks? I mean, there's always going to be discussion about them. What are you hearing about what could be next for players like Thatcher Demko? I imagine with Evander Kane being in the fold, that definitely spells the end for a guy like Brock Besser. What are you hearing out of Vancouver?
Yeah, I think the writing's been on the wall for Besser for some time, and he's going to have a lot of great options when the market opens July 1st. You know, I think in the immediate term, we looked at Thatcher Demko and, you know, a lot of reason to wonder about his future with the organization. He's got 1 year remaining on his deal. They just, as I mentioned, the Abbotsford Canucks won the Calder Cup and he, you know, that was a nice young goaltender down there named Artur Silovs, who obviously played for the Canucks a couple years ago in the playoffs. And they have Kevin Lankinen already signed. So you do the math. There's too many goaltenders. But, you know, right now it does seem as though the Canucks are focused on trying to get Demko signed, which I think is interesting. Perhaps that means someone else could be going out the door. We'll have to see, you know, what the fallout will be if they're able to get a deal done with him. But, you know, it is that kind of season. It's a tough spot. It's not to say you can't go into a contract year with a goaltender, but, you know, I think it's pretty clear now that the Canucks don't want to do that. And so they're going to see if they can get him signed. And then beyond that, they're looking to upgrade at the center position. They don't have a ton of cap space. I guess this is maybe the second part of the conversation we didn't have about Kane. You know, every decision they make, like a lot of teams, there's sort of trickle down effects. And, you know, I don't know exactly where they're going to go to fill that hole. I mean, P.S. Suter is a player that had a nice year in Vancouver that's set to hit free agency. Maybe there's another opportunity to get him signed. I'm not sure if the ship has sailed there. You know, but obviously Vancouver, it's a big season on the horizon. And so, you know, I could see them being active on the trade front. You know, they have a mid first round pick. You know, I believe that's been in play to some degree if they could maybe use it to get a player. So, you know, I think that they're hunting on a number of levels, but, you know, they traded away JT Miller. We don't need to go through all that again, but they don't have, there's no JT Miller replacement out there for them, right? I mean, they have a hole down the middle now since making that move. And so I think ideally they'd like to find a way to fill it. But, you know, in this marketplace right now, it might not be possible. It might be something that we're talking about them trying to do into next season and beyond, depending on what this summer yields.
All right. The Vancouver Canucks, again, a team that's never boring, and I'm sure we will find ways to talk more about them as things go on in the off season for sure. A team with Pettersson, Hughes, and now Evander Kane in their steed. Just must watch like normal. I still just can't get over this trade with Evander Kane going down the way that it did, but we're definitely going to be talking about this team a lot. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. And look, you're going to be talking about Edmonton too. I mean, they're not ending here. I mean, that $5 million they opened up for Kane, that's nice, but you know, they're now trying to move Victor Arvidsson. You know, I don't think they're as far down the road as that to say that it's going to happen for sure, but it's certainly something they're going to work to see happen. You know, he's got trade protection and he's got a say in the matter. So that complicates things, but he's due to make $4 million next season, on the cap, which they'd like to clear out. You know, unlikely to bring back Jeff Skinner. He was $3 million on the cap. I think John Klingberg's likely going to hit the market. I think he was $1.75 million. You start to do the math, and they do have the window if those things happen, and there's still a few ifs there. Specifically, Arvidsson is the biggest if. You know, where the Draisaitl extension, which is already done, kicks in. You get Evan Bouchard done, which is a priority right now for them. You know, he's going to take a big jump potentially to $9 or $10 million, depending on the length of the deal they do with him. And I think they could do a shorter deal. Wouldn't surprise me if the Bouchard contract ends up, not being a max term length deal just because of the cap hit situation. And then, I really do think they're going to make some kind of move in goal. And there's not an obvious answer out there. This isn't a year where there's like two absolute, must-haves if you're looking for goaltending. Jake Allen's the top name available, I'd say, on the UFA list. If they want to knock on that door again, there's been so much talk over the years about John Gibson maybe being acquired via trade. I'm not sure what Edmonton's going to do there, but I do think that they, are of a mind that they probably got to make some changes or a change to that position. I mean, we'll just have to see how that shakes out. And again, some of that is cap related. The other note on Kane that I didn't mention, and we've talked about it, but Trent Frederick is going to sign an extension with the Oilers. And so I think in Frederick, the Oilers feel that they have a younger version of Kane. I mean, maybe isn't going to be quite as offensive as Kane can be. I'm not sure that Frederick will be a 25-goal guy consistently in the league, but certainly brings some of the physical elements, can play up the lineup. He's someone he's even talked about trying to play center, which would be a benefit to the Oilers. They need centers in their organization below the top dogs that occupy the 1 and 2 spots. So that was part of the decision making too. Is my understanding is that Frederick deal is going to come in around $3.8 million, and Kane was making $5.125. So assuming that happens with Frederick, they've basically found the upgrade and cheaper, and they need all that cap space because of things are going to move around elsewhere. And probably the most important part of this, Julian, Connor McDavid. It all comes back to their captain, right? And
that's what I was going to ask about next. Exactly.
We devoted a bunch of time to him, but it's notable that they're already communicating all these plans with McDavid. Ryan Rishaug, my TSN colleague, reporting that Jeff Jackson and Stan Bowman, the GM of the Oilers, were in Ontario meeting already with McDavid. Since the season ended. No doubt laying out some of these plans. And I think that's very important. I don't think that anything's changed timeline wise. We shouldn't be focused on a McDavid extension coming right away when free agency opens and nothing like that. But, all of this is being done because this is an organization that doesn't have a lot of prospects. And obviously they lost 2 really good young players to the offer sheets last year in Broberg and Holloway. They don't have a ton of cap space, although they have a lot more right now than they had this morning when we woke up after that Evander Kane deal. And so the path to getting better isn't abundantly obvious, right? It's not a guarantee. It's not a foregone conclusion. And so, I just think we should put a cherry on top of everything that's going on here to note that this all happens while the team president and the GM are having discussions with McDavid. Not to say that McDavid's orchestrating trades. I'm not suggesting that at all, but he's very in the loop of what's going on. And he's probably one of the people that didn't need to see Evander Kane's tweet to know that trade was going down. I'm guessing he probably had some advance notice about it.
From what we know, I know we've discussed Connor McDavid before, but from what you may be hearing, does it still seem like a shorter term deal is on the table or something that Connor would want for his next contract? What are you hearing?
Yeah, that seems to be most likely. Mostly because when you think about it logically, his concern being, or his priority being, maybe rather than using the word concern, is that, the team has an ability to compete for the cup year after year after year. For any player, if you sign like an 8-year deal, there's a certain number of years there. You don't know what's going to happen. I mean, in the span of Connor McDavid's current 8-year deal, I can't even remember who he signed that with. Would that have been Peter Chiarelli? I think it would have been, was a GM. Ken Holland had a whole 5 years in Edmonton in the meantime. Now they moved on to Stan Bowman, all in the life cycle of one contract. And obviously been, 4 or 5 head coaches during that time. All the way back to Tippett, Woodcroft. You had a Ken Hitchcock segment in there. Obviously Chris Knobloch now. But I mean, so much happens, I guess, in my point, in that long a period of time. And so when you're at the stage of your career where you're his age, where you've made his money, I don't have the exact length for you, but I do think it's certainly going to be on the shorter end than the longer end. And that to me is pretty much a certainty. There would have to be some sort of dynamic shift for him to change course on that.
Anything else we need to drop off in terms of content from Vancouver or Edmonton before I go into your trade board, which you can read at The Athletic?
No, let's go to the board, bud.
The trade board from Chris Johnston, you can read at The Athletic right now. Trade offseason trade board 2.0. A bunch of targets on there. Number one on your list, Calgary Flames defenseman Rasmus Andersson, number one. Why is he so high on the list?
Well, because teams can't get that quality of defenseman on the open market. And I think that's first and foremost. Second of all is that, there's an understanding that his time in Calgary is winding down. And so, he's got 1 year left on his deal. There's still the possibility, of course, that the Flames come back with Andersson in the lineup to start the season. And we'll see if he's a trade deadline kind of trade or where things go from there. But, he's not signing an extension at this point in time in Calgary. And so I think that the Flames owe it to themselves to see what they can get for him. Now, whether or not this trade happens in the coming days, that's a bit of a mystery. I do know there are teams that would love to get their hands on him, that would love to sign him to an extension themselves, make that kind of deal. But, Calgary doesn't have the same urgency, right? I mean, it's one thing to be a team with a need. It's another thing even to be Rasmus Andersson and be like, you know what, I'm ready for a fresh start and want to go somewhere else. But, the Flames are the ones that have something to lose here if they make a bad deal. And so, I don't know if the urgency that others are feeling or wanting to apply to the situation will be felt enough in Calgary to see a move happen here. But a player of this ability, in the prime of his career, right shot, as an intangibles guy, but also, physical player, puts up some points. I mean, he's really a total package kind of defenseman, I think, in the mold of what you're looking for. Now, you might have concerns if you're signing to a long-term deal about how he'll age. You might have concerns about his skating. I mean, look, there's always questions like that, but I think that there's so much in the pro box if you're doing a pro and cons list here. And I'll go back to the fact that there's just not a lot of players that fit the needs that Andersson could for a team. And so all that conspires to put him number one on the trade board. I do think it's possible we do see him traded in the near future, but similarly, if it doesn't happen, he's going to be on the trade list that we put out in October, November, December as well, because, I think he could be an in-season trade if it doesn't happen this summer. So, that's kind of my understanding of where things sit now. It seems like everyone's on a good footing about it all. It's just a matter of, now Calgary's got to make the right decision and figure out, where that marketplace is. And if there's any good news on that front, I'll call it, is, Craig Conroy's now been down this road a few times with a few different players. Obviously made an Elias Lindholm deal, a Chris Tanev deal, Markstrom deal. You just look back in the last 2 years, and he's traded some significant players and I think done reasonably well, but also gained the experience of going through that process, talking to his peers, figuring out what makes the most sense, timing, all those sorts of things. And so, we'll just have to stay tuned kind of if something can happen perhaps around the draft here. But, the other part of this, as is the Flames aren't looking to get to the bottom of the league either. So, it's the kind of trade likely where they're looking for real bodies back too, and not just, draft picks and prospects and futures. And so that is a complicating factor that can't really be ignored, but, that's what they're working through right now.
What about the number two player on your list, Bowen Byram of the Buffalo Sabres?
It sounds like Buffalo's made traction there, that there's, that they're getting a little closer, I think, to moving Byram. He's in a spot where he's a restricted free agent. He's coming off the healthiest and most productive season of his NHL career, trending in the direction you'd want to see. And, the fact remains that the Sabres have a lot of money tied up on their blue line. Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power signed to long-term deals. Matthias Samuelsson as well. His name does appear lower down on the board. I think it's at least possible that you see him move perhaps instead. But, I think Bowen Byram is most likely to be moved. And probably there's been a lot of talk about JJ Peterka, his teammate, who's also a restricted free agent in need of a deal. I think that the focus right now is more actually on moving Byram, and they seem to have some traction. So, he's going to be a top four player, wherever he lands, and he's going to get a nice contract, and he's a good player. So, we'll see where that talk ends up, but, he's, it's a pretty unique guy out there in the market, and obviously not too long removed. Sabres probably made a good move to get him. They got him straight up for Casey Middlestad, if you remember. And Middlestad's since been moved on again to Boston as part of the Charlie Coyle deal. So, It's been a good piece of business for Buffalo, and it does appear that he's going to be moved rather than kept.
Anyone else worth mentioning? Anyone else worth mentioning on the list? A couple of great names here. Keandre Miller is on this list. You mentioned Peterka as well. Victor Arvidsson, who we've already touched on in Edmonton. Erik Karlsson is down the list as well. Noah Dobson is there as well. Tons of great names to check out on CJ's list at The Athletic.
Karlsson's an interesting name. He's only got 2 years left on his contract. I think if you look at this guy's career, like, his reputation has probably swung in all kinds of directions. Obviously he's been at the highest of the high. He's won 3 Norris trophies during his career, and was an absolute superstar for many years. Things haven't gone as well maybe of late, but 2 years left on that deal, $10 million cap hit now is what Pittsburgh would be moving. An interesting aspect of his contract is that it has a $5 million bonus due on July 1st. And so in some ways, he should be easier to move after July 1st because there's just less money remaining on his deal. But the other part of that is that, I think that Pittsburgh doesn't want to just pay that and then give him away. Like, if they pay that bonus, that will be a factor in whatever the return is that on the trade they make. So, I think a Karlsson move is possible just because how I started off with the Andersson talk. Like a lot of teams out there looking for centers or right Ds are hitting roadblocks. There's not a ton of those sorts of guys available on the open market. I mean, even you look at some of the best defensemen, that are on the UFA board. I mean, Gavrikov is a left shot. Provorov can play the right side, but he's a left shot. There's just not an abundance of players, and if you believe that Karlsson has some good in him, and man, I'll tell you, very small sample, but that Four Nations face-off, I mean, I thought he looked really good for Sweden in that tournament. And that's getting back into like a best-on-best situation of his peers. In that, again, in an isolated window over a couple games, you still saw it in him. I guess I'm just saying, a lot of things have to come together for that trade to happen. Karlsson has a no-movement clause. The money is significant. That bonus payment could affect how things go here. But I think Pittsburgh's really going to try to move him, they're the closest team to being in a rebuild, even if they're not calling that. And I think he probably wants a chance to play for, Stanley Cup somewhere if that's out there for him. So I guess he's kind of below the radar right now. And I'm saying don't put him too far below the radar because I could see an Erik Karlsson trade for sure on our horizon.
Speaking of Gavrikov and Provorov, those two names are in the top 10 of your top 80 free agents, your free agent big board. Are you good on all the big boards? You got your trade boards, free agent boards. It's a lot of typing these last few days.
It's a lifestyle, my friend. It's not you got to live the board life. I don't even want to let you in on a secret, but I got about 9 more capsules typed up for the next 9 players. Because we add like there was a Riley Smith signing on Wednesday. He was on the board, but he signed an extension in Vegas. So his name comes off the board, and then we added one more at the bottom. And so I've spent a lot of time on the boards, but it actually, I'll say this. It's an exercise that really gives you an idea of what's going on with the market. And we do have plans to stretch this thing out to 100 names by next week, which it's one thing to add 20 from today. Like that's probably doable. But you keep in mind, there's going to be more players signed that are on that board in the coming days. So, if Frederick's coming off that board, I bet Sam Bennett resigns in Florida. He's coming off that. So it's not just 20. It might end up being adding 30 names from today by the time we get to July 1st, because it wouldn't surprise me if 10 or so, players that are on this board end up signing deals. Anyway, it's a labor of love. I do actually love it. It drives me nuts at times. But it does give me a good sense of what's out there. And the two defensemen you're asking about, I mean, they don't get a ton of hype, but I'll tell you, Gavrikov, LA made a pitch to sign him, and it's not going to happen because I think he's getting over $7 million for sure, and probably closer to $8 million on the open market. Really an ideal number 2 defenseman. If you look at the defensive metrics, seals off the play, just nothing gets through him in a positive way. Maybe doesn't have the offensive capabilities you'd want out of your number 1 guy, but top pairing type of player beside the guy. And so he's going to get a big payday. And then Provorov, I'm not sure where this is going. Like there's a lot of reasons for him to potentially stay in Columbus. He's even got a younger brother who's committed to playing at Ohio State. But, as of right now, it doesn't sound like they're tangoing too meaningfully on a contract. And so, he's a pretty young free agent, and he had a nice year for the Blue Jackets. And so, he's in all situations defender, as I mentioned, can play both sides, can play the right even as a left shot. And, I think he's going to be in for a pretty hefty payday too, because the only defenseman above them is Aaron Ekblad, who I do think is going to go to market. I know the Panthers are trying to keep all three of their big free agents at the top, but I'm just not sure that Ekblad feels like the one that is most certainly or the least likely to stay at this point in time in Florida. And so, it's a pretty thin D market. I mean, you got Dmitry Orlov. When you go a little bit further down, I don't have the board in front of me, but I'm just going by my mind here. But there's not long before you're into the Klingbergs and Nate Schmitz and, guys who were sort of third pairing players on frankly, the teams that were just in the Stanley Cup final. I mean, certainly useful defensemen, but there's not a lot of high end on this trade board. I mean, Brent Burns, I know Carolina's making an effort to keep him, even at his age, and he's the NHL's Iron Man of the moment and hasn't missed a game in a long, long time. But there's not a lot out there for teams looking for upgrades, and that's why I think the trade market will be useful too.
Dante Fabro, Ryan Lindgren, Nate Schmidt, just going down the list as well. John Klingberg's there too. Henry Jokiharju, Cody Ceci.
I mean, even Jokiharju today, Boston, mentioned they're trying to keep him. And again, the reason is because there's just not that many players. Like at the end, like that's what this lesson teaches me. Even though there's 80 names there, when you're talking about 32 teams all trying to get a little bit better, there's just not enough players to get 32 teams to where they want to be at.
Yeah, like I feel like if I'm a competing team and I want my defense to get better, it's a pretty good market if you're a depth defenseman and you can fit on a contending team's third pair. Maybe there's a buyer beware sticker shock on some of these guys, depending on where they might fit in other markets. But if you're Nick Perbix, you might be signing a deal with a good contending team if Tampa can't find a way to keep you.
Yeah, you're getting a raise is what you're getting. I mean, that's the nice part about it. And that's why, to go back to what we're talking about, it's why I think there is the market conditions are there for an Erik Karlsson trade. Like even something like that is not as far-fetched as it might sound because, I think he's better than a lot of the players, again, that are available. I know it's expensive. Maybe you can get Pittsburgh to retain. I mean, the Penguins they're not giving the player away. So they're going to require a good return if you're having them eat money, if you're having them pay that bonus. But I mean, it's only 2 seasons and maybe you get that number down into the 7s and that trade starts to make a lot of sense for a lot of teams or some teams anyway.
What about John Tavares? We go from defenseman to forward in terms of pending UFAs.
I'm told they're still working on it, which is a good sign, I think, if you're trying to be on the Leafs end of this and you want it to get done. Because, the fact that the dialogue's still ongoing and they're finding their way through those conversations suggests they're still aiming at a North Pole where there's a happy solution and they're signing a contract and Tavares gets an extended run in Toronto. One thing that I have discussed that I think is no longer really at play is, throughout the year, I thought that maybe he was a candidate for one of those deferred money deals. Sounds like that isn't happening. Like, I don't think that has much appeal. So that's not a dynamic they can use to get the AAV lower. So far, I don't think the Leafs have wanted to extend the deal out really long. We've talked about that as a way to get the overall AAV lower. It's not to say they won't still do it. That might end up being the path to the solution. But so far, I think the Leafs have been, conscious of term with a player who's 34 years old. I mean, not an unreasonable thing, but it feels like because the dialogue's still going that this is still headed in the right direction. And I'd be really surprised if they didn't sign the deal, but nothing to report as of Wednesday evening here.
Okay. What about Claude Giroux in Ottawa? Steve Staios, the Sens GM, spoke early Wednesday morning saying that both sides are continuing to talk. Pierre LeBrun almost immediately after saying that the Sens and Giroux were supposed to talk. There's a gap between those two sides. I have to say this. I felt pretty confident about a deal being consummated at the beginning of the week. We're doing this on a Wednesday. I'm still confident, but not nearly as confident as I thought I would be at this point now. I'm not saying that it's going to go bad. All it could take is one thing could just change this entire negotiation, and we're talking about a contract extension for Claude Giroux. But I will acknowledge I don't feel nearly as confident about an extension happening as I did even 12 hours ago.
Wow. I mean, I didn't actually see Steve's comments at his press conference. Was it something he said there, like a feeling you got, or
I think it's just the fact that we're days out from free agency happening. This is a player that wants to be here. They signed here initially. They're not too far off from their hometown. Players have said they want him here. The team has said they want him here. Michael Andlauer was in part of some of those meetings in Buffalo when they were meeting with him and Pat Brisson. These guys want to be here. And day by day, it feels like that doubt kind of creeps in. And I think just seeing our colleague Pierre LeBrun say there's a gap, that makes me think, okay, all right. Obviously there had to have been a gap. That's why we're in this space to begin with. But I don't know. I don't feel the same level of confidence right now than I did yesterday. That's just how I feel off of what I'm hearing.
Well, it's amazing the parallels really with Tavares and Giroux because, Ottawa is a team that's got to be mindful of the cap, as looking for an upgrade on their blue line and they just want to have room to maneuver. They love the player. It's a player that's been paid a lot of money. He got paid a decent contract. His last contract here at the Senators, $6.5 million a year, if I'm not mistaken, for 3 seasons. They're asking him to take a hometown discount of sorts, and that's what the Leafs are doing with Tavares. But figuring out where that discount is not easy. And it's just a funny thing. I can't even imagine being one of these guys that used to be a superstar, that used to make among the most money in the league. And what it's like to age, where you're hey, I'm still good, but they want to pay you, at a lower pay scale. Again, it's not really a reflection of you. I think it's a league where we started the show talking about the Oilers traded Evander Kane because they didn't have the cap space to keep him. That is first and foremost why they traded him. And teams like Ottawa and Toronto don't want to have to trade away their good players or risk losing other players. They want to keep everybody together, right? And so I don't know how to go. I don't have a feel for the Giroux one. The fact they're still talking is positive, but you're right. You get to this late, close to July 1st, what could happen potentially, this goes for any of these conversations on extension, is if emotion gets into it. That's the one thing. If this gets it all emotional, and again, I'm not predicting that will happen, but that's where it can go sideways because you're dealing with a small window of time here before these players can, truly be free agents and sign elsewhere. And if for whatever reason they're you know what, forget this, I'm out of here. I'm being disrespected or whatever. I mean that possibility exists in all kinds of situations right now where teams are trying to get their players to sign. And look, some teams have had success, like Matt Duchene, 80-point season, signed for $4.5 million. For sure on the open market, he could have got more than that, but that's what he got in Dallas. Even that Riley Smith deal that got done on Wednesday in Vegas, he's still more effective than a $2 million player, but he signed for $2 million. Do you know what? Vegas needs him to take that kind of contract because they're trying to do all kinds of stuff, and every cap dollar is important for what else they might do with their other moves. And so, anyway, it's a long way of saying I can see the dilemma here if you're the player, even if you're the team, and it'll be fascinating. I mean, I'm still going to lean towards both Giroux and Tavares staying, just because it's a pain. Have you ever moved? And I'm just kidding. I know you moved across the country and back. I'm saying this rhetorically. I'm saying this rhetorically to anybody, any listener out there. Have you ever moved? Moving is a pain in the butt. And especially if you're established and you have families and you're in a city where you love it and you play for a team you love and you love going to work every day, don't F with happy, as they say, right? And so I feel like there's a path to extensions in both cases, but by the time we're doing Monday's show, I think we'll have a clear view of which way this is going. I mean, it's a big weekend for some of these contracts to get wrapped up. Obviously, the draft is on the front burner here Friday, Saturday for the GMs, but the time for posturing is basically over, and now it's time to get down and really get something done, or shake hands and go your separate ways and see what else is out there in the future for you.
I just want to make one more take as we talk about Tavares and Giroux. John Tavares, a near point per game player this past year in Toronto, if things don't work out for him with the Leafs, if he goes to market, I have to imagine that market for him, there will be teams calling. This is a guy who's still, early mid-30s, can still help a team get over that hump. If I was a GM, I'd want him on my team tomorrow. Claude Giroux, I think there would be teams who would call, but for a player who's 37, whose numbers have trended downward the last how many years, even though he's still a really good face-off guy, a guy who's settled into Ottawa, I don't know if he wants to do any more of that. I don't know if he wants to say Minnesota calls. I don't know if he's trying to get on a plane to Minnesota and reroute his life to go there. I just think it's a two different situations. Obviously, I just wonder.
Well, Tavares is signing for more money unless something really weird goes on, right?
1,000% too. Yes. I just think for Giroux, my ultimate point is the leverage is so much in Ottawa's camp that if it gets to a point where it just doesn't work out, I'm very curious how it would work for Giroux on the open market. Yes, the Montreal Canadiens, I would imagine them being interested just as an avenue for him to be closer to home. But how many other teams would pick up the phone and say, hey, man, we want Claude Giroux on our team? And depending on how much they want to pay him, how would that work out? I'm very curious. I'm not trying to disrespect him. He's worthy of being signed, but I'm curious what that market would look like versus what Tavares would get.
Well, here's a point to your point to my point.
Yes.
If he's looking at it, he's like, they're asking me to take such a low contract anyway. Why don't I go sign in Florida for $1 million and have a chance to win, or pick a place? Maybe that becomes the play for someone like him. It's okay, if I'm basically at this stage where I'm getting lower and lower down the salary rung anyway, why not go somewhere where you're chasing Stanley Cups? Go kind of on the Corey Perry model, right? Which has obviously worked very well for Corey in terms of reaching the Cup final in 5 out of 6 years. But taking 1 and 2 year deals, making around $1 million on each of them, and playing on really good teams, being at times a fourth liner, being at times a second liner when injuries hit or what have you. I mean, not everybody wants that life. A lot of people want to get settled and move around rather than move around, but there's always that option too. If you're you know what, they don't love me enough, I'm just going to go chase a cup. I wouldn't blame them either way, to be honest.
Very fair. Also, moving is a bitch. Anyway, let's get to Trevor Zegras. That's a move we didn't get to after our last episode on Monday. I think literally an hour after we finished recording, the Trevor Zegras move, sending him from Anaheim to Philadelphia, dropped. It happens. We're going to miss out on these moves.
Dude, just wait till this drops. What do you think? There's going to be something right after this show. I mean, that's how it goes.
Goodness, man. It's a good thing we're doing this now. What do you think is next for Philadelphia? They make the move for Zegras. What else could they be in the market for?
Well, I'll say I like the move for Philly just because why not? You're where they're at in the standings. They're looking for more skill. They've got a new coach there. They've got his best buddy and Jamie Drysdale there. There's a lot of reasons to think they might be able to make it work. They want to play him down the middle too, it sounds like, which will be an interesting experiment. And, the cost, wasn't too exorbitant. I mean, Ryan Paling's a nice sort of depth center that they gave up, and then a couple draft picks, but nothing too crazy. Certainly where we would have, when we first heard Trevor Zegras rumors, we were talking a bigger package than that, but he's getting closer and closer to UFA, and also he's getting further and further from those back-to-back 60-point seasons, right? It's been a bit of a tough road for him, largely driven by injury. What's next at Philadelphia? I think that they want to be smart. They are, this could be we could have been having this recording for 40 years, but they're looking to upgrade their goaltending in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, has not been a place where it's been too kind to those that tend the net for all kinds of different reasons over the years. But I do think that they are one of the teams very motivated to upgrade in goal. I mean, there's a few others: Edmonton, Detroit, San Jose's looking for a goalie. I'm sure I'm missing a few here, but Philadelphia with Jake Allen, it makes sense that they're going to take a hard run at him. I'm not sure that it's a place he would want to play. It would be a short move for him in New Jersey, but I think he's going to have some options available to him when it gets to free agent day on Tuesday. But I think for Philly, it's incrementally improving the lineup, and then a big one is they need more saves this year. That was one thing that made last season particularly difficult. And I'm not sure they're going to take the jump up to being a playoff team right away. I don't think that's the internal expectation, but they want to be better, and one way you get better is lower the goals against.
I hope, for the sake of Trevor Zegras, by the way, that this trade rejuvenates him in his better years in Anaheim. An exciting player to watch. We've talked about his talent on this show and some of the goals he's been able to create. Like, I would love it if this trade to Philadelphia found a way to rejuvenate him. I'm still very curious to know what it'll be like between him and Rick Tocchet. But I'm actually hoping that this works out for Trevor Zegras, a guy who I think at his best is an exciting player in this league.
I'll say this about Rick Tocchet, known for being a player's coach, but also, he was an assistant coach in Pittsburgh at the time, but he was the Phil Kessel whisperer once upon a time in Pittsburgh, rather. And when Kessel first got moved over to the Penguins and started having a lot of success there, he credited, the understanding and the way that Tocchet would work through things with him and talk with him and communicate with him. And so I'm just saying there is some track record of him. I understand because, Trevor Zegras is not a hard-nosed player. He's not a player that's known for playing 200 feet. He works a little harder in one end than the other, those kinds of things. But, first of all, he's taken strides individually. I think in Anaheim, that was something they demanded of him last season. And to his credit, he did. But secondly, he's got a coach there that he's brought the best out of players like him in the past. And so, I do think that there's a chance this works. And if not, it's a 1 year, he's got 1 year left on his contract, right? This isn't a forever thing. This is a year where both sides got to try to make it work, get the best out of each other. And I do think that there's a strong possibility it does work, but a lot of that's going to be on them to make it happen.
Anything else you want to touch on the Vegas Golden Knights? I know we mentioned Riley Smith signing his extension earlier on Wednesday, but anything else we want to go in on them? I kind of have them on my rundown. I want to give you another chance to go in on that more if we need to.
Just an interesting team in the weeds, right? The Riley Smith deal really helps, as I mentioned, because they are dealing with a cap situation there. We're waiting to hear what happens with Alex Pietrangelo, who, it's known that his health isn't fully right, but, not totally clear what that means, where he'll be at. There was some bogus rumor bouncing around the last couple of days about a Thomas Hertl deal to Carolina, which was just never a thing that was happening. So trust your insiders, stick to the right ones. But they're in the middle of everything. And of course, they're still widely viewed as the place that Mitch Marner wants to play. And given their track record, you can count on them wanting to make a pitch for him when it gets to July 1st. And so to do so, they're going to have to move some money around. They have Nick Hague also as a restricted free agent due for a raise on their blue line. I mean, sometimes we sleep on Vegas a little. I'm just saying, as we get into this draft weekend, they're a team I think that could be in the middle of a few different things. And then ultimately, when it gets to July 1st and beyond, whenever Mitch Marner makes his decision, they have to be in pole position to land the top free agent on the board.
How do we get Trust Your Insider on a shirt?
I don't know how that works, but we've gotten dumber things on a shirt in the past, or a hat, or what have you. So I'm sure we can figure that one out.
I would hope so. I would wear a Trust Your Insider shirt or hat. I've worn a hat that says "That's Ridic." I'm sure Trust Your Insider should be no problem.
I've got a "That's Ridic" hat kicking around too.
Yeah, we got to rock those a little bit more. We got to bring back the promotion of the merch we have.
The merch.
Yes, because we do have merch. Stick taps. Do you have a stick tap, my man?
I do. It was a week where you could have went with a Hall of Famer, but I'm just going to go with an all-around good guy, and that's Matt Martin, who announced his retirement. Long career, got a lot out of his career, for someone who didn't have the most amount of talent. Left a huge mark, obviously, in Long Island, where he played most of his time with the Islanders. Also had a couple seasons in Toronto with at the time, young Maple Leafs, the early days of the Matthews, Marner, Nylander era. But, someone who was very popular among teammates, treated the media right, kind of did it the right way, and he had really a nice career. So just wanted to stick tap Matt and wish him the best. I'm sure, he's joining the Islanders as a special advisor type of role, but someone I'm sure that's going to have a long second career in the game off ice.
Who was the Detroit Red Wings player he chirped at in that famous clip that's gone around how many times where he's on the bench? It was Drew Miller. Okay. All right. I don't know why Justin Abdelkader came to my head, but no, Drew Miller is the guy he went back and forth with. That was a really legendary chirp on the part of Matt Martin, a personality we will miss in the National Hockey League. But he'll be fine in the front office for Matthew Darche as a special assistant to the GM. Speaking of the Hall of Fame, yeah, we didn't even get to touch on the fact that the Hall of Fame class in being they named their list of inductees. So many great names. Alexander McGillney, I think, is worthy of being mentioned. The fact that he finally gets in to the Hall of Fame, triple Gold Club member, a trailblazer for Russian players getting into the league. I think the fact that him being in the Hall of Fame is long overdue. You know what? I think it's worth giving him a stick tap. Why not?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this. This will connect with about 4% of our listeners. But if you were a kid in 1992-93 season, which was a special season in the NHL, they celebrated the 75th anniversary. They had the cool patches on all the jerseys. That's the year that McGillney went bonkers in Buffalo. And he was legit as a kid. You know, at that time, like, you really only got highlights. Like, you weren't watching the Sabres games unless you lived in Buffalo. But, you know, he felt like the most exciting player in the world in that moment. So, you know, anything that claps me back to the youth where I fell in love with the sport, that was around the time where, for me, like, I really became a hockey obsessed nut. Maybe a little before that, but certainly by that point I was one. McGillney was the guy. So it's cool to see him get in. And you're right. It felt long overdue. I didn't think he'd get in because everybody else was sort of a no-brainer. You know what I mean? Like Joe Thornton, Zdeno Chara, like, they were getting in first ballot. So I didn't know if there'd be room to add someone who'd been on multiple ballots before. But this is the 1 year. I guess if you're a Carey Price fan, you're maybe a little upset that he didn't get in. But other than that, I didn't see a lot of consternation on the webs about the choices this year by the Hockey Hall of Fame selection committee.
Yeah, I think they mostly got it right. And I think for Carey Price, if the fact that he didn't get in this year, I think he'll get in next year. But yeah, a lot of great names: Jennifer Botterill, Zdeno Chara, Brianna Decker, Duncan Keith, Alexander McGillney, Jack Parker, Danielle Sauvageau, Joe Thornton. Stick taps to them for getting into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And I will give an honorary mention to Shea Gilgeous-Alexander of the OKC Thunder, completing probably the best season by a Canadian basketball player, winning the NBA championship with OKC, Finals MVP, regular season MVP, Western Conference Finals MVP, outstanding season from Hamilton's own SGA. I got to give him some props.
There you go. Don't say that nothing good doesn't come out of Hamilton.
Exactly. That's very true. That's going to do it for today's edition of the CJ Show. I felt like we blew through all our topics so fast. I didn't expect to work as fast as we did, but can't say we're not efficient. Get your questions in for our Monday show, and look to our episodes for continuing coverage of the NHL offseason as stuff happens. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long, enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk to you all on Monday.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.